Katherine had been married to Michael for 12 years, but lately, something felt terribly wrong. Every Saturday, he disappeared without explanation. "Just running errands," he would say, but his eyes told a different story. The mysterious phone calls at odd hours. The way he guarded his phone like it held state secrets. After 12 years of marriage, Katherine thought she knew everything about her husband. She was devastatingly wrong. This Saturday will be different. Katherine decided to follow him and discover the truth once and for all. Her heart pounded as Michael's car turned into an unfamiliar neighborhood she had never seen before. Michael parked outside a building Katherine did not recognize. What was he doing here every Saturday? Then Katherine saw her, a young woman with special needs, rushing to embrace her husband like they had known each other forever. Katherine's world crumbled. Her husband, who claimed to be an orphan with no family, was hugging another woman. They walked together to a small house nearby. Katherine followed, her hands trembling as she watched her marriage fall apart. An elderly man opened the door, greeting Michael like a son. But Michael had told her he had no family left alive. Katherine watched in horror as Michael handed the man an envelope. Was he paying them? For what? 12 years of marriage. 12 years of believing her husband was an orphan. 12 years of lies. Michael came out looking around suspiciously. Katherine's heart stopped. Had he seen her car? Katherine raced home, her mind spinning with questions. Who were those people? Why was he giving them money? When Michael walked through their door, Katherine was waiting. The confrontation that would change everything was about to begin. Who is she, Michael? Katherine's voice shook with rage and betrayal. And don't dare lie to me anymore. Michael's face went white. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. His secret was finally exposed. 12 years, Michael. 12 years, she told him he was an orphan. Who were those people he was secretly visiting? The man Katherine married, the man she trusted with her heart, had been living a double life. But the truth about to unfold would shock her even more. Viewers from around the world would witness this story unfold. Many would share their thoughts and connect with this powerful tale of hidden truths. Katherine stood in their living room, her entire body trembling with a mixture of rage and heartbreak that she had never experienced before in their 12 years of marriage. For over a decade, she had believed every single word Michael told her about his tragic past, hanging on to every detail of his supposedly orphan childhood. He claimed to be completely alone in the world except for her love and companionship. Speaking of growing up in foster care with no family connections, no childhood memories with siblings or parents. She had comforted him through lonely holidays, held him when he spoke of having no one, and built their entire relationship on the foundation of being each other's only family in this world. I want answers, Michael, and I want them now. Katherine's voice shook with fury as she paced back and forth across their living room. For 12 years, you've looked me in the eye and told me you were an orphan. 12 years of lies. I saw you today with that woman. I saw you with that old man, and I want to know who they are and why you've been hiding them from me. Her blue eyes blazed with a pain so deep that Michael physically recoiled from her gaze. Every family photo on their walls seemed to mock the foundation of lies their marriage had been built upon. Michael shifted uncomfortably, running his hands through his hair repeatedly as he avoided her piercing stare. "Katherine, please, you're blowing this out of proportion," he said weakly, his voice lacking any conviction. "It's not what it looks like. You're misunderstanding the situation completely." But even as the words left his mouth, he knew how pathetic they sounded. He had been caught red-handed, and his attempts to minimize what she had witnessed only made him look more guilty and desperate. The confident man she had married seemed to have disappeared entirely, replaced by someone who looked cornered and afraid. Misunderstanding. Katherine's voice rose to near shouting as she threw her hands up in complete exasperation. "Michael, I have eyes. I saw you hug that woman like she was family. I saw you hand money to that old man like you've been supporting him for years." Tears of betrayal streamed down her face as the full weight of his deception crashed over her like a tidal wave. "I based our entire relationship on the story that you were alone in this world. I felt sorry for you. I wanted to be your family, and it was all a lie." Katherine wiped angry tears from her cheeks as she stared at the man she thought she knew. Tell me about the woman I saw you embracing, Michael. Tell me about the money you handed over like it was routine. Because from where I stood, it looked like my husband has been living a double life while I've been here thinking we were building something honest together. Her voice broke with each word, years of trust crumbling in real time. The wedding photos on their mantle seemed to mock what she now realized had been a marriage built on fundamental lies. Michael's face went pale as he fidgeted with his wedding ring, visibly nervous and desperate to avoid the direct question she was asking. Look, Katherine, we don't need to get into all of this right now. Maybe we should talk about this tomorrow when we've both had time to calm down, he said, clearly trying to change the subject and buy himself time. His eyes darted around the room, looking anywhere but at his wife's face. You're upset, and I understand that, but jumping to conclusions isn't going to help either of us right now. But his evasive tactics only made Katherine more suspicious and angry. Katherine shook her head in complete disbelief, her patience finally reaching its breaking point after years of what she now realized had been careful manipulation. No, Michael, we're not waiting until tomorrow, and we're not calming down. I want the truth right now, or I'm packing my bags and leaving this house tonight. Her voice echoed through their home with a finality that made Michael's blood run cold. After 12 years of marriage, don't I deserve to know who my husband really is? Don't I deserve to know if anything about our life together has been real? Michael's eyes widened in panic as the reality of losing her hit him like a physical blow. Katherine, please don't do this, he pleaded desperately, reaching out toward her as she backed away from him. I can explain everything, but I need time to do it right. This isn't something I can just blurt out in 5 minutes. There's so much you don't understand about my past, about why I've kept these things from you. His voice cracked with emotion as he saw her pulling a suitcase from the closet. Please, just give me a chance to explain properly. After 12 years together, don't I deserve at least that much? Katherine stood with her tear-stained face reflecting the pain of complete betrayal, her hands trembling as she held their wedding photo. Time, Michael. You've had 12 years to tell me the truth. 12 years to trust me enough to share your real life with me. Her voice was barely above a whisper now, filled with the devastating realization that her entire marriage had been built on lies. I don't even know who you are anymore. How can I trust anything you say when our whole relationship started with you lying about something as basic as whether you have family? Michael collapsed into a chair, his head in his hands, as the weight of his deception finally caught up with him. Katherine, if you leave now without hearing the whole story, you'll never understand why I did what I did. You'll never know that everything I've done has been because I love you more than life itself. His voice was barely audible as Katherine turned toward the door with her suitcase. Please don't let 12 years end like this. Please don't let my mistakes destroy the best thing that ever happened to me. But Katherine was already walking away, her heart too shattered to hear any more words that might just be more carefully crafted lies. Michael jumped up from his chair as Katherine reached for the door handle with her suitcase in hand, his heart pounding with the terrifying realization that he was about to lose the most important person in his life. Katherine, wait. Please don't leave like this, he called out desperately, his voice cracking with emotion he could no longer hide. You're right. You deserve the truth, and I'm ready to tell you everything. The woman you saw today, her name is Jennifer, and she's my sister. The words hung in the air like a confession that had been locked away for far too long, and Katherine's hand froze on the doorknob as she processed what he had just revealed. Katherine turned slowly from the door, her face a mixture of shock, confusion, and lingering anger as she tried to process this bombshell revelation. Your sister, she repeated in disbelief, setting her suitcase down but keeping her distance from him. Michael, you told me you were an orphan. You said you had no family, no siblings, no one. How can you suddenly have a sister that you've been secretly visiting for 12 years? Her voice was filled with a combination of hurt and bewilderment as she struggled to reconcile this new information with everything she thought she knew about her husband's past. The room felt charged with the electricity of long-buried secrets finally being exposed to the light. Michael ran his hands through his hair, a nervous habit that had become more pronounced as his carefully constructed lies began to crumble around him. "Jennifer has Down syndrome," he said quietly, his voice filled with a mixture of love and shame that Katherine had never heard before. "She's 28 years old, and she's been living in a specialized care facility for the past 15 years. I visit her every Saturday, and I pay for her care, her medical expenses, everything she needs." His confession came out in a rush, as if he was afraid that if he stopped talking, he would lose his courage to continue revealing the truth that he had hidden for so long. Katherine's hands flew to cover her mouth as the full weight of this revelation hit her like a physical blow. "Oh my God, Michael," she whispered, her anger beginning to mix with confusion and a dawning understanding of the complexity of the situation. "You have a sister with special needs, and you've been taking care of her all this time? Why would you hide something like that from me? Why would you lie about having family when you're doing something so loving and responsible?" Her voice was softer now, but still filled with hurt and bewilderment as she tried to understand how the man she loved could have kept such a significant part of his life secret from her for their entire marriage. Michael sat heavily on the couch, his shoulders sagging under the weight of years of secrecy and shame that he had carried alone. "My childhood wasn't the fairy tale that yours was, Katherine," he began, his voice barely above a whisper as painful memories surfaced. "My parents were young when they had me, and even younger when Jennifer came along. They tried their best, but they were overwhelmed, financially struggling, and completely unprepared to deal with a child who had special needs. The stress of Jennifer's condition, the medical bills, the constant care she required, it tore our family apart piece by piece." He looked up at Katherine with eyes filled with old pain and fresh vulnerability, finally allowing her to see the broken parts of himself that he had hidden away. Katherine found herself sitting on the edge of a chair, drawn into his story despite her anger and hurt, as Michael pulled out an old, worn photograph from his wallet that he had carried for years. "This is Jennifer when she was little," he said, showing Katherine a picture of a beautiful child with curly brown hair and the characteristic features of Down syndrome, beaming with pure joy as a young Michael held her protectively. "I was only 7 when she was born, but I became her primary caregiver almost immediately. While other kids were playing video games or riding bikes, I was helping Jennifer with her therapy exercises, feeding her, making sure she took her medications." His voice was filled with a mixture of love and exhaustion as he remembered those early years of responsibility that no child should have had to bear. Tears began to form in Michael's eyes as he continued his painful confession, years of suppressed emotions finally finding their voice. "By the time I was a teenager, my parents had essentially given up. They couldn't handle the financial pressure, the emotional stress, the constant demands of caring for Jennifer. They started drinking heavily, fighting constantly, and Jennifer became an afterthought in their own home." His voice broke as he remembered those dark years. "I had to make a choice, Katherine. I could either let Jennifer suffer in that toxic environment, or I could find a way to get her the specialized care she deserved, even if it meant sacrificing my own dreams and future." The weight of that teenage decision still pressed heavily on his shoulders, even decades later. Katherine felt tears forming in her own eyes as she began to understand the enormous burden Michael had carried silently for so many years. "So you found the care facility for her," she said softly, her voice filled with a growing comprehension of a sacrifice. "And you've been paying for everything yourself since you were practically a child." The anger in her voice was being slowly replaced by awe and heartbreak as she realized the depth of his love and commitment to his sister. She found herself leaning forward, drawn to comfort the man who had been carrying this incredible responsibility alone, even though part of her was still reeling from the deception. Michael nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand as years of shame and secrecy finally began to pour out. "I got my first job when I was 16, and every penny I earned went to Jennifer's care. When I graduated high school, I gave up my college scholarship because I couldn't afford both tuition and Jennifer's expenses. I've been working 2 jobs ever since, my accounting job during the day and freelance work at night, just to make sure she has everything she needs. His voice was filled with exhaustion from years of financial struggle and emotional isolation. I never told you because I was ashamed, Katherine. I was ashamed of my family's failure, ashamed that I couldn't give you the life you deserved because so much of my income goes to Jennifer's care. Katherine slowly moved to sit beside Michael on the couch, her heart breaking as she finally understood the true depth of his character and the enormous sacrifice he had been making in silence. "Michael," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion, "you should never be ashamed of loving your sister and taking care of her. What you've done is incredibly noble and selfless." She reached out to touch his hand gently, feeling the calluses from years of extra work that she had never questioned before. "But why didn't you trust me enough to tell me? Why do you think I would judge you for having a sister with special needs? Did you really think so little of my character?" The hurt was still there in her voice, but it was now mixed with deep admiration for the man she was finally getting to know completely. The next morning, Michael's hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel as he drove Katherine toward the care facility where Jennifer lived, a journey he had made countless times alone, but never with his wife beside him. The silence in the car was heavy with unspoken emotions and lingering hurt from their confrontation the night before, but underneath it all was a fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, Katherine would understand once she met Jennifer face to face. "She doesn't know you're coming," Michael said quietly, breaking the tense silence. "I've never brought anyone to meet her before, so she might be a little overwhelmed at first, but Jennifer has the most loving heart you'll ever encounter." His voice was filled with nervous anticipation and deep love for his sister, mixed with anxiety about how this meeting would change everything between him and Katherine. Katherine stood hesitantly outside the entrance of the Sunshine Care facility, her heart pounding with a mixture of nervousness and complete uncertainty about what to expect from this encounter. She had never spent time with someone who had Down syndrome before, and despite Michael's reassurances, she felt completely unprepared for this moment that would change her understanding of her husband forever. "What if I say the wrong thing?" Katherine asked, her voice barely above a whisper as her insecurities surfaced. "What if I react inappropriately, or she can tell that I'm uncomfortable? I don't want to hurt her feelings or make this harder for either of you." The building was modern and welcoming, with cheerful yellow paint and well-maintained gardens. But Katherine still felt like she was walking into completely uncharted territory where one wrong word or expression could damage relationships that had been built over many years. As they entered the bright, cheerful common room of the facility, Katherine immediately spotted Jennifer sitting by a large window, her curly brown hair catching the morning sunlight as she worked intently on what appeared to be a colorful jigsaw puzzle of a beautiful landscape. Even from across the room, Katherine could see the concentration on Jennifer's face and the gentle, deliberate way she handled each piece, her movements careful and purposeful. The room was filled with other residents engaged in various activities, some watching television, others participating in art therapy, and a few reading books with the help of dedicated staff members. The atmosphere was warm and nurturing, nothing like the sterile institutional setting Katherine had unconsciously feared, and she began to feel some of her anxiety melt away as she observed the genuine care and respect with which everyone was treated. The moment Jennifer looked up from her puzzle and saw Michael standing in the doorway, her entire face transformed with a joy so pure and radiant that it took Katherine's breath away and brought immediate tears to her eyes. "Mickey," Jennifer called out with unbridled excitement, using the childhood nickname that only she was allowed to use, and she immediately abandoned her puzzle pieces to jump up from her chair. The love and excitement in her voice was unmistakable and completely genuine, filled with the kind of uninhibited affection that most adults had learned to suppress or hide behind social conventions. Katherine watched in amazement as Jennifer's eyes literally lit up with happiness, her whole body practically vibrating with the joy of seeing her beloved brother, and she began to understand just how much this weekly visit meant to both of them. Jennifer ran toward Michael with her arms outstretched wide, completely oblivious to anyone else in the room as she focused entirely on her brother with single-minded devotion and love. "I missed you so much this week," Jennifer exclaimed as she threw herself into Michael's waiting arms with the kind of total trust and affection that Katherine had rarely witnessed between any family members. "I've been counting the days until Saturday, just like always. I finished the book you brought me last week, and I've been practicing my writing every single day like you taught me. Wait until you see how much better I've gotten with my letters." Her enthusiasm was absolutely infectious, and Katherine found herself smiling despite her nervousness and the emotional turmoil of the past 24 hours, drawn in by Jennifer's pure and uncomplicated joy. Katherine watched with growing emotion and understanding as Michael hugged his sister with a tenderness and patience she had rarely seen from him in their 12 years of marriage, his entire demeanor transforming in Jennifer's presence. Gone was the stressed, secretive man she had confronted the night before, replaced by someone who radiated pure love, infinite patience, and protective devotion that ran deeper than anything Katherine had ever witnessed. "I miss you too, Jenny," Michael said softly, using his own special nickname for her as he gently stroked her curly hair with the practiced touch of someone who had been providing comfort for years. "And I brought someone very special for you to meet today. This is Katherine, my wife that I've told you so much about over the years." Katherine's heart skipped a beat as she realized that Michael had been talking about her to Jennifer throughout their entire marriage, sharing pieces of their life together, even while keeping Jennifer's existence a complete secret from her. Jennifer turned toward Katherine with a bright, innocent smile that immediately melted away any remaining nervousness Katherine had been carrying, her face glowing with the kind of pure acceptance and excitement that Katherine had rarely experienced from anyone, even longtime friends or family members. "You're my sister-in-law," Jennifer exclaimed with absolute delight, clapping her hands together in excitement before opening her arms wide for a hug. "Mickey talks about you all the time. He says you're the most beautiful and kindest person in the whole wide world, and that you make him happier than anyone ever has before." Without any hesitation, social awkwardness, or second thoughts, Jennifer stepped toward Katherine with her arms outstretched, her face beaming with the kind of unconditional love and immediate family acceptance that Katherine had been unconsciously craving her entire life without even realizing it. Katherine found herself swept into Jennifer's enthusiastic and completely genuine embrace, and for the first time since discovering Michael's devastating secret, she felt her wounded heart truly begin to heal from the inside out. Jennifer's hug was warm, strong, and filled with the kind of unconditional acceptance and instant family bond that Katherine had been desperately needing without even knowing it. "It's so wonderful to finally meet you, Jennifer," Katherine said softly, her voice thick with emotion as tears began to flow down her cheeks while she held this incredible young woman who clearly adored her brother beyond measure. As they embraced, Katherine caught Michael's eye over Jennifer's shoulder and saw relief, overwhelming gratitude, and a love so deep it took her breath away reflected in his gaze, and she began to understand the impossible emotional juggling act he had been performing for years, trying to protect both the women he loved most in the world. Jennifer pulled back from the hug with excitement, practically radiating from every fiber of her being, immediately taking Katherine by the hand to show off her latest accomplishments and artwork with the pride of someone who had been waiting years for this moment. "Look, sister-in-law, I painted this picture of our family," Jennifer said, pointing to a colorful painting of 3 people standing in front of a house with a bright yellow sun overhead. "This is me, and this is Mickey, and this is you. I painted it last month when Mickey told me how much he loves you and wishes we could all be together someday." Katherine's eyes filled with fresh tears as she realized that Jennifer had been including her in family artwork for years, based solely on Michael's descriptions and her own generous, loving heart. Meanwhile, Michael quietly began explaining to Katherine the extent of Jennifer's care needs, the specialized therapy sessions, the life skills training, and the enormous monthly costs that had been consuming most of his income for over a decade. As their visit continued, and Jennifer proudly showed them around the facility, including her own tidy room decorated with dozens of photos of Michael from throughout the years, Katherine listened with growing admiration and dawning comprehension as Michael quietly explained the true magnitude of his financial commitment and personal sacrifice. She learned about the specialized medical care, the round-the-clock supervision, the therapy sessions, and the countless extras that made Jennifer's life not just bearable, but genuinely happy and fulfilling. "Every penny has been worth it to see her smile like this," Michael said softly, watching Jennifer organize her treasured photo collection with obvious pride and joy. "She's not just surviving here. She's thriving. She has friends, hobbies, and most importantly, she knows she's loved unconditionally." Katherine began to understand that her husband wasn't just a good man. He was an extraordinary man who had been quietly sacrificing his own dreams and comfort for years to ensure his sister's happiness. And yet she was still struggling to process how he could have hidden something so fundamental about himself from her for their entire marriage. After their emotional visit with Jennifer, Michael drove Katherine through a different part of town toward his father's modest neighborhood, his hands gripping the steering wheel tighter with each passing mile. The silence between them was different now, not filled with anger like the night before, but heavy with Katherine's processing of everything she had learned about her husband's hidden life. "My father doesn't know you're coming either," Michael said quietly, his voice carrying years of complicated family dynamics and unresolved emotions. "He's proud, Katherine, maybe too proud for his own good. He doesn't like accepting help, even from his own son, and he spent years feeling guilty about what happened to our family when Jennifer and I were children." The weight of generational shame and financial struggle was evident in Michael's voice as he prepared Katherine for yet another piece of his hidden past. Katherine followed Michael up the cracked sidewalk leading to a small, modest house that had clearly seen better days, its paint fading and the small front porch sagging slightly under the weight of time and deferred maintenance. The neighborhood was quiet and working class, filled with homes that spoke of families doing their best with limited resources, and Katherine felt a profound shift in her understanding of her husband's origins. "This is where I grew up," Michael said softly, his voice carrying a mixture of nostalgia and embarrassment as he looked at the house that held so many difficult memories. "After Jennifer was born and the medical bills started piling up, we lost our bigger house and had to move here. My dad has been living here alone since my mother passed away 8 years ago, and he refuses to let me help him move somewhere nicer or even do basic repairs because he says he's caused our family enough financial burden already." When the front door opened, Katherine saw a man who was clearly Michael's father. The same hazel eyes, the same strong jawline, but weathered by years of hard work and the kind of deep exhaustion that comes from carrying too much responsibility for too long. David's face showed surprise at seeing Michael with a woman he didn't recognize, and Katherine could immediately see the pride and stubbornness that Michael had warned her about in the way his father straightened his shoulders despite his obvious fatigue. "Mickey, we didn't tell me you were bringing company," David said, his voice carrying a hint of embarrassment as he quickly tried to smooth down his work clothes and run a hand through his graying hair. "I'm not really prepared for visitors, and the house isn't exactly—" He trailed off, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of anyone seeing the modest circumstances in which he lived, his pride evident in every word and gesture. "Dad, this is Katherine, my wife," Michael said gently, placing a protective hand on Katherine's back as he made the introduction that had been 12 years in the making. "Katherine, this is my father, David." The moment hung heavy with unspoken history and complicated emotions as David's eyes widened in recognition of the name he had heard mentioned countless times over the years. Katherine could see the internal struggle playing out on David's weathered face. Surprise at finally meeting the woman his son had spoken of so fondly, embarrassment about his modest circumstances, and a deep-seated shame about the family's past that had never fully healed. "So you're the famous Katherine," David said finally, his voice softening despite his obvious discomfort. "Mickey talks about you every time he visits, though I never thought I'd actually get to meet you. I'm sorry you have to see me like this, unprepared, and—" He gestured helplessly at his surroundings, his pride clearly wounded by the unexpected exposure. Inside the small living room, Katherine took in the sparse but clean surroundings, furniture that had clearly been well-loved for many years, family photographs covering every available surface, and the kind of careful organization that spoke of someone living on a very limited budget but maintaining their dignity through cleanliness and order. David bustled around nervously, clearing newspapers and offering Katherine the most comfortable chair in the room, his movements betraying his anxiety about having an unexpected guest in his modest home. "I'm afraid I don't have much to offer you," David said apologetically, his hands fidgeting with a dish towel as he tried to think of how to properly host the woman his son had married. "I can make some coffee, though it's just the instant kind, or I might have some tea somewhere in the kitchen cabinets." His desire to be a good host warred visibly with his embarrassment about his limited resources, and Katherine's heart went out to this proud man who was clearly doing his best under difficult circumstances. As they settled into conversation, David began to open up about his son's character in a way that revealed years of profound gratitude and deep regret. "You know, Katherine, Mickey has been a man of this house since he was just 7 years old," David said, his voice heavy with emotion as he looked at the family photographs that documented happier times. "When Jennifer was born and we realized she had special needs, I'm ashamed to say that his mother and I just couldn't handle it. We were young, we were broke, and we had no idea what we were doing." His voice cracked slightly as he continued. "Mickey stepped up in ways that no child should ever have to. He took care of his sister when we were too overwhelmed to cope. He worked odd jobs to help with expenses when he should have been playing with friends, and he never once complained about the sacrifices he was making for our family." David's eyes filled with tears as he continued his painful confession, years of suppressed guilt finally finding voice in front of the woman who had unknowingly shared the burden of his son's sacrifices. When Mickey graduated high school, he had a full scholarship to college, a full ride to study engineering, which had always been his dream since he was a little boy building things with blocks and scraps of wood. But he turned it down, Katherine. He gave up his entire future so he could keep working and paying for Jennifer's care because his mother and I had basically given up trying. The weight of this revelation hung heavy in the small room, and Katherine could see the shame and regret that had been eating at David for decades. He told us it was fine, that he didn't really want to go to college anyway, but I knew he was lying to protect our feelings. He sacrificed his dreams so that Jennifer could have the life she deserved, and I've never forgiven myself for letting him do it. Katherine felt her heart breaking as she listened to David's story, finally understanding the full scope of Michael's sacrifices and the family dynamics that had shaped him into the man she married. "David," she said gently, reaching out to touch the older man's weathered hand, "Michael chose to help his family because he loves you all. That speaks to his character, not to any failure on your part." But even as she offered comfort, Katherine was processing the enormous weight of responsibility that Michael had been carrying since childhood, and she began to understand why he had been so afraid to share this part of his life with her. "He's been working 2 jobs our entire marriage," she said quietly, more to herself than to David, pieces of the puzzle finally clicking into place. "All those late nights, he said he was doing freelance accounting work. He really was, wasn't he? To pay for Jennifer's care and to help support you." David nodded emphatically, his emotions overwhelming his usual stoic demeanor as years of pride and stubbornness crumbled in the face of his need to finally tell someone the truth about his remarkable son. "Every month for the past 15 years, Katherine, Mickey has paid for Jennifer's care facility, her medical expenses, her therapy sessions, her special equipment, everything she needs to have a good life. And every month, he brings me money for groceries, utilities, house repairs, and my medications, even though I tell him I can manage on my own." David's voice was filled with a mixture of overwhelming pride and crushing guilt. "He never lets me pay him back, never makes me feel like a burden, and never tells anyone what he's doing because he doesn't want praise or recognition. He just quietly takes care of his family because that's the kind of man he is. But Katherine, I need you to know that every dollar he spent on us is a dollar he couldn't spend on building a life with you, and that knowledge has been killing me for years." Katherine looked at Michael with completely new eyes, seeing him not as the man who had deceived her, but as someone who had been quietly carrying an enormous burden of love and responsibility for his entire adult life. "He talks about you constantly, Katherine, David continued, his voice growing stronger as he spoke about his son's devotion. Every time he visits, it's Katherine this and Katherine that. How proud he is of your teaching, how much he loves your laugh, how lucky he feels to have found someone as wonderful as you. He lights up when he talks about you, and I can see how much you mean to him. David leaned forward earnestly, his tired eyes filled with desperate hope. I know he should have told you about us from the beginning, and I've told him so many times over the years. But Katherine, I think he was just so afraid that if you knew about Jennifer and me, about the financial burden we represent, you might decide that loving him wasn't worth all the complications that come with our family. He spent so many years putting everyone else's needs before his own that I don't think he believed he deserved to have both his family and the woman he loves more than life itself. The next afternoon, Katherine sat across from her best friend Maria in their favorite coffee shop, her hands wrapped around a warm mug as she tried to process everything that had happened in the past 48 hours. The familiar environment provided a stark contrast to the emotional whirlwind she had been experiencing, and she desperately needed the grounding presence of someone who knew her well enough to help her sort through her complicated feelings. I don't even know where to begin, Maria, Katherine said, her voice still heavy with exhaustion and confusion. 2 days ago, I thought my husband was having an affair. Yesterday, I discovered he has an entire family that he's been supporting and caring for since he was practically a child himself. I'm so confused about how to feel, angry about the lies, amazed by his sacrifice, hurt by his lack of trust in me. I feel like I don't even know who I am anymore, let alone who my husband is. Maria leaned forward with the kind of concerned attention that only comes from years of deep friendship, her dark eyes filled with compassion as she studied Katherine's exhausted face. As a nurse who had spent years working with families in crisis, Maria had seen firsthand how secrets could both protect and destroy relationships, and she understood the complexity of Katherine's situation better than most people would. Katherine, honey, I can only imagine how betrayed and confused you must feel right now, Maria said gently, reaching across the table to squeeze her friend's hand. 12 years is a long time to keep such a huge secret, and I understand why you're questioning everything about your marriage. But before you make any decisions about what this means for your future, I think you need to step back and really examine why Michael might have felt he couldn't share this part of his life with you. Her voice carried the wisdom of someone who had seen many families struggle with similar issues of shame, pride, and fear. Katherine wiped away fresh tears as she tried to articulate the storm of emotions that had been raging inside her since discovering Michael's secret. That's just it, Maria. I don't understand why he couldn't trust me with this. I mean, caring for a sister with special needs? Supporting his elderly father? These aren't shameful things. They're beautiful, noble things that make me love him even more. But how can I trust him now when our entire relationship has been built on what I thought was honesty? Her voice cracked with the pain of feeling deceived by the person she trusted most. Every time he disappeared on Saturdays, every time he got those mysterious phone calls, every time he seemed tired or stressed about money, I was creating scenarios in my head about affairs or gambling or who knows what else. If he had just told me the truth, I could have supported him, helped him, been part of the solution instead of feeling like an outsider in my own marriage. Maria nodded thoughtfully, drawing on her years of experience working with families who had members with special needs, and she could see that Katherine needed both emotional support and practical education about the realities that Michael had been facing. Katherine, in my work at the hospital, I've seen countless families dealing with special needs situations, and I can tell you that the shame and fear that Michael has been carrying is unfortunately very common. Maria explained with the patience of someone who had helped many families navigate similar challenges. People with disabilities, especially intellectual disabilities like Down syndrome, face enormous societal prejudices that most of us don't even realize exist. Many families feel like they have to hide these situations because they've experienced rejection, judgment, or people who simply can't handle the reality of what caring for someone with special needs actually involves. She paused to let Katherine absorb this information before continuing with gentle firmness. Let me tell you what Michael's daily reality probably looks like, Maria continued, her voice taking on the professional tone she used when educating families about complex medical situations. People with Down syndrome require specialized medical care, regular therapy sessions, constant supervision, and enormous financial resources. The average cost of lifetime care for someone with Down syndrome can exceed $1 million, and that's assuming no major medical complications. Catherine's eyes widened as she began to grasp the true magnitude of the financial burden Michael had been carrying alone. Beyond the money, there's the emotional toll of constant worry, the physical exhaustion of being responsible for someone else's well-being 24 hours a day, and the social isolation that often comes when people don't understand or can't relate to your situation. Michael has been living with all of this pressure since he was 7 years old. Katherine, that kind of responsibility changes a person in fundamental ways that most of us can't even imagine. Katherine sat in thoughtful silence as Maria's words helped her understand Michael's perspective in ways she had never considered before. You're saying that he might have kept this secret not because he didn't trust me, but because he was protecting me from a burden that he wasn't sure I could handle? Katherine asked slowly, her analytical mind beginning to process the situation from entirely new angles. Maria nodded encouragingly, pleased to see her friend starting to consider alternative explanations for Michael's behavior. Think about it from his perspective, honey, Maria said gently. He's probably seen people react with pity, discomfort, or outright rejection when they learn about Jennifer. He's probably watched potential relationships, and when people realized what being with him would really mean in terms of financial and emotional commitment. After years of that kind of rejection, it would be natural for him to want to protect the one relationship that brought him real happiness and stability. Katherine found herself examining her own attitudes and assumptions as Maria's words forced her to confront some uncomfortable truths about herself and society in general. I hate to admit this, Maria, but I'm not sure how I would have reacted if Michael had told me about Jennifer on our first date, or even when we were engaged, Katherine said quietly, her voice filled with the kind of honest self-reflection that only comes from being forced to examine one's deepest beliefs. I like to think I would have been supportive and understanding, but honestly, I don't know if I was mature enough or selfless enough back then to truly comprehend what it would mean to share my life with someone who had such enormous ongoing responsibilities. The admission was painful but necessary, and Katherine could feel her anger toward Michael beginning to shift into something more complex and nuanced as she recognized her own potential role in creating the environment that made him feel he had to hide such an important part of his life. Maria reached across the table again, her expression filled with the kind of compassion that comes from years of helping people navigate complex family situations and moral dilemmas. Katherine, the fact that you're even asking yourself these questions shows how much you've grown as a person over the past 12 years, Maria said with gentle conviction. Michael fell in love with the woman you were then, but he's been living with the fear that if you knew the whole truth about his life, you might decide that loving him wasn't worth all the complications that come with his family situation. She paused to let Katherine absorb this perspective before continuing. But here's what I think Michael couldn't see because he was too close to the situation. You're not the same person you were 12 years ago. You've matured. You've developed empathy and strength through your work as a teacher. And most importantly, you've built a foundation of love with him that's strong enough to handle this kind of challenge. The question now is whether you can help him see that his fears were unfounded and that you're ready to be a true partner in all aspects of his life. Tears began to flow down Katherine's cheeks again, but this time they were tears of understanding rather than anger or hurt, as she finally began to see Michael's deception through the lens of love and protection rather than betrayal and mistrust. He was trying to protect me, wasn't he? Katherine whispered, her voice filled with the dawning realization of just how much Michael had sacrificed to keep their relationship uncomplicated and happy. All these years, he's been carrying this enormous burden alone because he thought sharing it with me would ruin what we had together. He worked 2 jobs to support his family without ever asking me to contribute or even understand why money was always tight. He gave up his dreams and his free time to take care of Jennifer and his father, and he never once made me feel like I was competing with him for his attention or resources. The full scope of Michael's love and sacrifice was finally becoming clear to her, and with that understanding came a profound shift in how she viewed their entire relationship. Maria smiled with the satisfaction of watching her friend work through a complex emotional puzzle and arrive at a place of greater understanding and compassion. "So what are you going to do now, Katherine?" Maria asked gently, already seeing the determination beginning to form in her friend's eyes. "Now I understand that Michael wasn't living a double life because he didn't love me. He was living a double life because he loved me so much that he was willing to sacrifice his own need for support and understanding to protect our happiness," Katherine said, her voice growing stronger with each word as clarity replaced confusion. "And I understand that if I want our marriage to move forward on a foundation of complete honesty and trust, I need to show him that his fears were unfounded, that I'm strong enough and loving enough to be a true partner in caring for Jennifer and supporting his father. I need to prove to him that learning about his family doesn't make me love him less. It makes me love him more than I ever thought possible." 2 days later, Katherine found herself standing alone outside the Sunshine Care facility, clutching a small gift bag containing some books she had carefully selected for Jennifer and feeling a mixture of nervousness and determination coursing through her veins. She had spent the previous evening thinking about everything Maria had told her, and she knew that if she wanted to truly understand Michael's world and prove that she could be a real partner in his life, she needed to spend time with Jennifer without Michael's protective presence mediating every interaction. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot as Katherine took a deep breath and walked toward the entrance, knowing that this visit would be a crucial step in either rebuilding her marriage on a foundation of complete honesty or discovering that she wasn't strong enough to handle the reality of loving someone with Michael's complex family responsibilities. At the reception desk, Katherine introduced herself as Michael's wife and explained that she wanted to spend some time with Jennifer, hoping that the staff would allow this unusual visit from someone who had never been there without Michael before. The kind receptionist smiled warmly and explained that Jennifer had been talking excitedly about Mickey's wife ever since their visit earlier in the week, and that she would be thrilled to have another visitor. "She's been showing everyone the drawings she made of your family," the receptionist said with obvious affection for Jennifer. "She's such a sweet girl, and she absolutely adores her brother. You're very lucky to be part of such a loving family." The words hit Katherine with unexpected force, reminding her that from Jennifer's perspective, Katherine had always been part of the family, even when Katherine herself didn't know that family existed. Katherine found Jennifer in the same spot where they had first met, sitting by the large window and working intently on what appeared to be a new art project, her curly hair catching the afternoon sunlight just as it had a few days earlier. For a moment, Katherine simply watched Jennifer work, observing the careful concentration and genuine joy that Jennifer brought to everything she did, and feeling a profound sense of connection to this young woman who had unknowingly been sharing her brother with Katherine for over a decade. Jennifer was humming softly to herself as she worked, completely absorbed in creating something beautiful, and Katherine could see why Michael had dedicated his life to ensuring that Jennifer could live in an environment where her natural creativity and joy could flourish without the limitations that society often imposed on people with disabilities. When Jennifer looked up and saw Katherine approaching, her entire face lit up with the same pure delight that had taken Katherine's breath away during their first meeting. But this time, there was an added element of familiarity and genuine affection that made Katherine's heart swell with unexpected emotion. "Katherine, my sister-in-law," Jennifer exclaimed, immediately abandoning her art project to jump up and greet Katherine with the kind of enthusiastic welcome that most people reserve for their very favorite people in the world. "You came back to see me. I was hoping you would, but Mickey said you were probably too busy with your important job teaching children. But you're here. This is the best surprise ever." Jennifer's joy was so infectious and genuine that Katherine found herself smiling despite the complex emotions she had been wrestling with all week. Katherine sat down at the activity table with Jennifer and presented her with a gift bag, watching with growing warmth as Jennifer's eyes widened with excitement at the unexpected surprise. "I brought you some books that I thought you might enjoy," Katherine said, pulling out a collection of stories about animals and adventures that she had chosen based on what Michael had told her about Jennifer's interests. "Mickey told me that you love reading, and as a teacher, I know how important it is to have lots of different books to choose from." Jennifer's reaction was more enthusiastic than Katherine could have imagined. She clutched the books to her chest and actually bounced in her chair with excitement. Her joy so pure and unfiltered that Katherine felt tears forming in her eyes as she realized how little it took to make Jennifer truly happy, and how much love and appreciation this young woman had to offer anyone who took the time to show her kindness. Jennifer immediately wanted to share something special with Katherine in return, and she carefully retrieved a well-worn photo album that was clearly one of her most treasured possessions. "I want to show you all my pictures of Mickey," Jennifer said proudly, opening the album to reveal page after page of photographs documenting Michael's visits over the years, birthdays, holidays, special occasions, and countless ordinary Saturday afternoons that had clearly meant the world to both siblings. Katherine found herself looking at a photographic history of the man she thought she knew, seeing him through Jennifer's adoring eyes as he helped her blow out birthday candles, assisted her with art projects, read her stories, and simply spent time being the loving, patient brother that Jennifer clearly worshipped. "Look, this is Mickey teaching me to write my name," Jennifer said, pointing to a photo of a much younger Michael patiently guiding Jennifer's hand as she practiced her letters. "He was so patient with me, even when I made mistakes." As Katherine looked through page after page of photographs, she began to see a side of Michael that she had never witnessed in their 12 years of marriage. A man who was infinitely patient, endlessly creative in finding ways to bring joy to his sister's life, and completely devoted to ensuring that Jennifer never felt forgotten or unloved despite the limitations of her circumstances. "Mickey never misses my birthday," Jennifer said with pride that was absolutely heartbreaking in its simplicity. "Even when he's sick or tired, he always comes to see me on my birthday and brings me something special. Last year he brought me a music box that plays my favorite song, and the year before that he brought me a stuffed Mickey Mouse because I love Disney so much." Jennifer's complete faith in Michael's reliability and love was evident in every word she spoke, and Katherine began to understand that for Jennifer, Michael wasn't just a brother who visited occasionally. He was the center of her universe, the one constant in her life that made everything else bearable and beautiful. Jennifer's eyes lit up with pure excitement as she shared her biggest dream with Katherine, her voice filled with the kind of innocent hope that adults rarely allowed themselves to feel. "Katherine, Mickey promised me that someday, when he saves enough money, he's going to take me to Disney World," Jennifer said, practically bouncing in her chair with excitement. "He showed me pictures of Cinderella's castle and told me all about the rides and the characters I could meet. I've been saving up my allowance money too, and I practice walking long distances every day, so I'll be strong enough to walk around the whole park." The pure faith in Jennifer's voice, her absolute belief that Michael would keep his promise no matter how long it took, brought tears to Katherine's eyes as she realized that every dollar Michael had been spending on Jennifer's care was also an investment in her dreams and hopes for the future. "I even have a special Disney dress that Mickey bought me for when we go," Jennifer added shyly. Jennifer's voice became quieter and more vulnerable as she shared something that had clearly been weighing on her heart for years. "Katherine, can I ask you something? Are you going to leave Mickey like some of his other girlfriends did when they found out about me?" The question hit Katherine like a physical blow, and she could see the fear and sadness in Jennifer's innocent brown eyes. "Some of them seemed really nice at first, but when Mickey brought them to meet me, they got uncomfortable and stopped wanting to be around him. Mickey always told me it wasn't my fault, but I know they left because having a sister like me was too much trouble." Katherine's heart broke as she realized the pattern that had shaped Michael's fear of sharing his family. He had been rejected before because of Jennifer, and that's why he had been so terrified to tell Katherine the truth. Jennifer continued softly, "I don't want to be the reason Mickey loses someone he loves again. He talks about you all the time. and I can see how happy you make him." Katherine felt tears streaming down her face as she finally understood the full depth of pain that both Michael and Jennifer had been carrying, and she knew with absolute certainty that she would never be one of those people who walked away from this beautiful family. "Jennifer," Katherine said firmly, taking the young woman's hands in her own, "I promise you that I will never leave Mickey because of you. In fact, learning about you and seeing how much he loves you makes me love him even more than I ever thought possible." Jennifer's face lit up with joy and relief as Katherine continued. "You're not something that someone has to tolerate about Mickey. You're a gift, and anyone who can't see that doesn't deserve either of you. And Jennifer, I want you to know that when Mickey takes you to Disney World, I'm going to be right there with both of you, because that's what families do." Jennifer threw her arms around Katherine in a fierce hug, and as they held each other in the golden afternoon light, Katherine felt something fundamental shift in her heart. She wasn't just forgiving Michael anymore. She was falling in love with his family, and she finally understood what true unconditional love really meant. 3 days after her transformative visit with Jennifer, Katherine found herself sitting in Pastor James's comfortable office, seeking the spiritual guidance she desperately needed to navigate the complex emotions and moral questions that had been consuming her thoughts. The familiar smell of old books and the gentle afternoon light filtering through stained glass windows provided a sense of peace that Katherine hadn't felt since discovering Michael's secret. "Pastor James, I'm struggling to understand how to move forward in my marriage," Katherine began, her voice reflecting the deep confusion that had been plaguing her for days. "I've discovered that my husband has been keeping a significant part of his life secret from me for our entire marriage. And while I'm beginning to understand his reasons, I'm still hurt by the deception and unsure how to rebuild trust between us." Pastor James listened with the patient attention that had made him a trusted counselor to his congregation for over 20 years, his kind gray eyes reflecting genuine compassion as Katherine shared the story of Michael's hidden family and her own journey of discovery and understanding. "Katherine, what you're describing is one of the most complex moral and emotional situations that married couples can face," Pastor James said thoughtfully. "The question isn't whether Michael was right or wrong to keep this secret. The question is how both of you can learn from this experience and move forward with greater honesty, trust, and understanding." He leaned forward slightly, his voice taking on the gentle but firm tone that Katherine had always appreciated in his counsel. "Tell me, as you've learned more about Michael's situation with his sister and father, how has your understanding of his character evolved?" Katherine found herself becoming emotional as she tried to articulate the profound shift in her understanding of her husband's character. "Pastor, when I first discovered what I thought was his betrayal, I was ready to leave him," Katherine admitted, her voice thick with the memory of that painful night. "But the more I've learned about his family, the more I realize that everything he's done has been motivated by love and sacrifice rather than deception or selfishness. He's been quietly carrying an enormous burden for his entire adult life, working multiple jobs to support his sister and father while never asking me to share that responsibility or even understand why money was always tight." She wiped away tears as she continued. "I'm beginning to see that Michael wasn't hiding his family because he was ashamed of me. He was protecting me from what he thought was too heavy a burden for anyone else to carry." Pastor James nodded thoughtfully as he processed Katherine's words, drawing on decades of counseling experience and biblical wisdom to help her navigate this complex situation. "Katherine, what you're describing reminds me of the story of the Good Samaritan," Pastor James said gently. "Sometimes the most profound acts of love are the ones that require the greatest personal sacrifice, and often those acts are done in secret without any expectation of recognition or reward." He opened his Bible to a familiar passage, his voice taking on the reverent tone he used when sharing Scripture. In Matthew, Jesus tells us that when we give to the needy, we shouldn't let our left hand know what our right hand is doing, meaning that the most genuine acts of charity and love are those done without fanfare or public acknowledgement. It sounds to me like Michael has been living out this principle for most of his adult life, caring for his family not because he wanted praise, but simply because it was the right thing to do. Katherine felt a new wave of understanding wash over her as Pastor James helped her see Michael's actions through the lens of faith and biblical teaching. So you're saying that Michael's secrecy might have been a form of humility rather than deception? Katherine asked, her voice reflecting the dawning comprehension that was beginning to reshape her entire perspective on the situation. Pastor James smiled with the satisfaction of watching someone work through a complex moral puzzle and arrive at greater understanding. Katherine, consider this. Michael could have easily used his family situation to gain sympathy or to excuse any financial limitations in your marriage. Instead, he chose to handle these responsibilities privately, ensuring that your relationship was built on genuine love and compatibility rather than pity or obligation. He paused to let this perspective sink in before continuing. That kind of selfless love, the kind that protects and serves without expecting anything in return, is one of the highest forms of Christian devotion. Pastor James leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful as he continued to help Katherine process her complex feelings about forgiveness, trust, and moving forward in her marriage. Katherine, I want you to think about the parable of the unmerciful servant, Pastor James said, his voice taking on the teaching tone that Katherine had heard countless times from a pulpit. In that story, Jesus reminds us that we have all been forgiven much, and therefore we must be willing to extend that same forgiveness to others, especially those we love most. He looked directly into Katherine's eyes, his expression both compassionate and challenging. Michael made a choice to protect you from his burdens, and while that choice caused you pain when the truth was revealed, it came from a place of love rather than malice. The question you need to ask yourself is whether you can forgive him for trying to protect you, and whether you're willing to share those burdens with him moving forward. Tears began to flow down Katherine's cheeks as Pastor James's words helped her see the situation with new clarity and spiritual perspective. Pastor, I think I've been focusing so much on feeling betrayed by his secrecy that I haven't fully appreciated the magnitude of his love and sacrifice, Katherine said, her voice thick with emotion and newfound understanding. When I think about it from the perspective of Christian love, the kind of love that serves without expecting anything in return, I can see that Michael has been living out those principles every single day for the past 12 years. She wiped her tears as the full weight of this realization hit her. He didn't hide his family because he didn't trust me or because he was ashamed of them. He hid them because he loved me so much that he was willing to carry that burden alone rather than risk our happiness. That's not betrayal. That's the kind of sacrificial love that Jesus calls us to show one another. Pastor James smiled with genuine warmth as he watched Katherine work through her emotional and spiritual journey toward forgiveness and understanding. Katherine, true love isn't just about sharing the good times and the easy moments. Pastor James said with the wisdom that came from years of counseling couples through difficult situations. True love is about choosing to stand together through the challenges, the burdens, and the complexities that life inevitably brings. Michael has been carrying his family's burdens alone for years, but now you have the opportunity to show him what it means to have a true partner who is willing to share those burdens with him. He leaned forward with earnest conviction. The question isn't whether you can forgive Michael for his secrecy. The question is whether you're ready to demonstrate the kind of unconditional love that doesn't just accept someone's burdens, but embraces them as your own, because that's what marriage truly means. Katherine felt a profound sense of clarity and determination settling over her as Pastor James's counsel helped her understand not just what she needed to do, but why she needed to do it from a place of faith and love rather than mere obligation. Pastor James, I know now that I don't just want to forgive Michael. I want to show him that his fears about sharing his burdens were unfounded, Katherine said, her voice growing stronger with each word as her resolve crystallized. I want to prove to him that learning about Jennifer and his father doesn't make me love him less. It makes me respect and admire him more than I ever thought possible. And I want to show Jennifer and his father that they're not burdens to be tolerated, but family members to be loved and cherished. She paused as the full scope of her commitment became clear to her. I think God has been preparing me for this moment, through all the years of our marriage, building my capacity to love in ways I never knew I was capable of. Pastor James stood and placed a gentle hand on Katherine's shoulder, his expression filled with the pride and satisfaction that came from watching someone grow in faith and understanding through a difficult trial. Katherine, I believe that this experience, as painful as it has been, is going to strengthen your marriage in ways that wouldn't have been possible otherwise, Pastor James said with conviction. When couples go through trials like this and emerge with greater love and understanding, their relationship becomes a testimony to the power of forgiveness, sacrifice, and unconditional love. He smiled warmly as he prepared to send her back into the world with renewed purpose and spiritual strength. Go to Michael with an open heart and show him that his years of sacrifice have not been in vain. Show him that love multiplies when it's shared rather than diminishes when it's divided. And remember that in choosing to embrace his family as your own, you're not just healing your marriage. You're creating a legacy of love that will impact Jennifer, his father, and future generations. Saturday evening, Katherine drove to the office building where she knew Michael would be working his weekend cleaning job, the second job she had never truly understood the importance of until now. As she walked through the empty corridors toward the cleaning supply room, her heart pounded with nervous energy and newfound determination. She had spent the entire day thinking about her conversation with Pastor James, and she knew that this moment would define the future of their marriage. When she found Michael in his cleaning uniform, methodically mopping the floors with the same quiet dedication he brought to everything in his life, she was struck by how much this man had sacrificed for the people he loved. "Michael," she called softly, causing him to look up in complete surprise. His face showed a mixture of embarrassment, confusion, and fear as he realized that his wife had discovered yet another piece of his hidden reality. Michael's first instinct was to feel ashamed that Katherine was seeing him in his cleaning uniform, doing the humble work that he had hidden from her for years out of pride and fear of judgment. "Katherine, what are you doing here?" he asked, setting down his mop and unconsciously trying to smooth his work clothes, his voice filled with the same defensive embarrassment he had shown when she first discovered his secret family. "You shouldn't be here. This place isn't. I wasn't expecting—" He trailed off, realizing that there was no point in trying to hide anymore, but still struggling with the vulnerability of being seen in this context. His shoulders sagged slightly as he faced the reality that every aspect of his carefully compartmentalized life was now exposed, leaving him with nowhere to hide from the woman he loved but had been too afraid to trust completely. Katherine stepped closer to Michael, her heart breaking as she saw the shame and embarrassment in his eyes, and she realized that this moment was her opportunity to show him that she saw his work not as something to be ashamed of, but as evidence of his incredible character and dedication. "Michael, there's nothing for you to be embarrassed about," Katherine said gently, her voice filled with the love and respect that had been growing in her heart over the past week. "I came here because I needed to see this part of your life, to understand the full extent of what you've been doing to take care of your family." She reached out and touched his arm, feeling the tension in his muscles as he struggled with being seen in what he considered his most vulnerable state. "I'm not here to judge you or to make you feel ashamed. I'm here because I finally understand what real love and sacrifice look like, and I want you to know that I see you, all of you, and I'm not going anywhere." Michael looked up at Katherine with tears forming in his eyes, years of suppressed emotion and fear finally beginning to surface as he realized that this moment might be the turning point he had been both hoping for and dreading for 12 years. "Katherine, I never wanted you to see me like this," Michael said, his voice cracking with the weight of years of hidden shame and insecurity. "I've been so afraid that if you knew the truth about my life, the jobs I have to work, the family I have to support, the reasons why we never seem to have enough money for the things other couples take for granted, you would realize that you deserve someone better, someone who could give you the life you truly deserve." His words came out in a rush, as if a dam had finally burst and all his fears and insecurities were pouring out at once. "I love you so much that I was willing to live a double life rather than risk losing you. But I realize now that I was just hurting both of us by not trusting you with the truth." Katherine didn't hesitate. She immediately stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Michael, holding him tightly as years of misunderstanding and fear began to dissolve between them. "Oh, Michael," she whispered against his shoulder, her own tears flowing freely as she felt the full weight of his burden and the depth of his love for her. "You beautiful, foolish man. Don't you understand that learning about your family and seeing how hard you work to take care of them doesn't make me love you less? It makes me love you more than I ever thought possible." She pulled back slightly so she could look into his eyes, her hands framing his face as she spoke with absolute conviction. "You've been carrying this enormous responsibility since you were practically a child, sacrificing your own dreams and comfort to make sure Jennifer and your father have everything they need. That's not something to be ashamed of. That's the most beautiful expression of love I've ever witnessed." Michael's emotional defenses finally crumbled completely as Catherine's words of acceptance and love washed over him, and he found himself sobbing with a relief so profound that it shook his entire body. "Katherine, I've been so scared," he admitted through his tears, his voice barely above a whisper as years of suppressed fear and isolation poured out of him. "I've been terrified every single day for 12 years that you would find out about my family and decide that being with me wasn't worth all the complications and financial sacrifices that come with it. I watched other relationships, and when people realized what my life really entailed, and I couldn't bear the thought of losing you too." He clung to her as if she might disappear at any moment, his body shaking with the emotional release of finally sharing the burden he had carried alone for so long. "I love Jennifer and my father more than life itself, but I love you too, and I didn't know how to make room for all of that love in my life without hurting someone." Katherine held Michael tightly as she spoke, her voice filled with the strength and conviction that had been building in her heart throughout this difficult week of discovery and growth. "Michael, listen to me carefully," she said, pulling back so she could look directly into his eyes and make sure he understood every word she was about to say. "I don't want you to choose between your family and me, because that's not what love is supposed to be about. Real love multiplies rather than divides, and I want to be part of your family, not a replacement for them." Her voice grew stronger with each word as she voiced the commitment that had been forming in her heart. "I want to help you take care of Jennifer and your father. I want to share this responsibility with you because that's what marriage is supposed to be, two people standing together against whatever life throws at them, supporting each other through every challenge and celebrating every joy together." Michael looked at Katherine with amazement and dawning hope, as if he was seeing her clearly for the first time in their 12 years of marriage. "Do you really mean that?" he asked, his voice filled with wonder and disbelief that the woman he loved could not only accept his family situation, but actually want to be part of it. "Katherine, you have no idea what you're saying. Taking care of Jennifer means regular visits, medical appointments, helping with her daily needs, and enormous ongoing expenses that will never end. Supporting my father means helping with his living expenses, his medications, and eventually dealing with all the challenges that come with aging. This isn't something you could try for a while and then change your mind about. This is a lifetime commitment that will affect every decision we make about our finances, our time, and our future." His words were meant as a warning, but Katherine could hear the hope underlying his concerns, the desperate desire to believe that she really understood what she was offering to take on. Katherine felt tears of joy streaming down her face as she realized that this conversation was healing something fundamental in their relationship, something that had been broken by years of secrecy and fear, but was now being rebuilt on a foundation of complete honesty and unconditional love. "Michael, I understand exactly what I'm committing to, and I want all of it," Katherine said with absolute certainty, her voice ringing with conviction and love. "I want to be Jennifer's sister-in-law, not just in name, but in reality. I want to help plan her birthday parties and take her to Disney World like you promised. I want to help your father with his grocery shopping and make sure he knows he's not a burden, but a cherished family member. And most of all, I want you to know that you never have to carry these responsibilities alone again." She reached out and took his hands in hers, squeezing them tightly as she made her final declaration. "I fell in love with you 12 years ago, but learning about your family has made me fall in love with you all over again, deeper and more completely than I ever thought possible." Michael pulled Katherine into a passionate embrace, holding her as if she was the most precious thing in the world, which in that moment, she absolutely was. "Katherine, I love you so much," he whispered against her hair, his voice thick with emotion and overwhelming gratitude. "I've been living in fear for so long that I forgot what it felt like to hope that someone could love all of me, not just the parts that were easy to accept." They stood together in that humble office building hallway, surrounded by the tools of his second job that he no longer had to hide, and Katherine realized that this was where their real marriage was beginning, not with the vows they had spoken 12 years ago based on partial truths, but with this moment of complete honesty, acceptance, and shared commitment to building a life together that included everyone they loved. As they held each other in the soft evening light filtering through the office windows, both of them knew that they had moved beyond forgiveness and understanding into something much deeper and more powerful. A love that was strong enough to embrace not just each other, but everyone who mattered to them, creating a family that was bigger and more beautiful than either of them had ever imagined possible. 6 months later, Katherine and Michael stood together in a beautiful outdoor venue, surrounded by the people who mattered most to them, ready to renew the vows that would truly reflect the depth of their commitment to each other and their extended family. The ceremony was simple but deeply meaningful, held in a garden that Jennifer had helped choose because she loved the colorful flowers and the way the sunlight filtered through the trees. Katherine wore a simple white dress that she had picked out with Jennifer's enthusiastic input, while Michael stood beside her in a navy suit, his face glowing with a happiness and peace that Katherine had never seen before. David sat in the front row, tears of joy streaming down his weathered face as he watched his son finally have the wedding he deserved, one built on complete honesty, unconditional love, and the promise of a future where no one would have to carry their burdens alone. Jennifer stood proudly beside Katherine as her maid of honor, wearing a beautiful lavender dress that made her feel like a princess and clutching a bouquet of flowers that she had helped arrange that morning with barely contained excitement. Her face radiated pure joy as she watched her beloved brother and her new sister exchange vows that acknowledged not just their love for each other, but their commitment to the family they were all building together. Katherine's voice was strong and clear as she spoke vows that reflected everything she had learned about love, sacrifice, and family. "Michael, I promise to stand beside you not just as your wife, but as Jennifer's sister and David's daughter-in-law. I promise that you will never again have to choose between the people you love because I choose to love them all." Michael's response was equally emotional, his voice trembling as he promised to never again hide any part of himself from her and to trust her with his fears, dreams, and burdens. The reception was an intimate celebration held in the same garden, with tables arranged so that their small but precious family could sit together and truly celebrate the new chapter they were all beginning. Jennifer couldn't stop talking about how beautiful the ceremony had been and how excited she was to officially be Katherine's sister, while David raised toast after toast to the woman who had not only saved his son's marriage, but had brought healing and joy to their entire family. "To Katherine," David said, his voice filled with emotion as he raised his glass, "who showed us all what it means to love without limits and to build a family based on choice rather than just blood." The evening was filled with laughter, tears of joy, and the kind of deep contentment that comes from knowing that everyone at the table was exactly where they belonged, surrounded by people who loved and accepted them completely. The Sunday family dinners that had become their weekly tradition were held in Katherine and Michael's home, which had been lovingly rearranged to accommodate Jennifer's visits and David's needs as he had moved to a small apartment just 10 minutes away. Katherine had transformed their spare bedroom into a comfortable space for Jennifer's overnight visits, complete with all her favorite books, art supplies, and the Disney decorations that reflected her dreams and personality. David, who had initially resisted accepting more help from his son, had gradually allowed Katherine to become part of his support system, accepting her assistance with grocery shopping, medical appointments, and household tasks with a gratitude that touched her heart deeply. "I never thought I'd live to see the day when our family would be complete like this," David said one evening as they all sat around the dinner table, sharing stories and planning their upcoming trip to Disney World. Katherine had embraced her role as Jennifer's sister with the same dedication and creativity she brought to her teaching career, spending hours helping Jennifer learn new life skills, develop her artistic talents, and pursue her dreams with confidence and joy. Together, they had learned to cook Jennifer's favorite meals, practiced reading more challenging books, and worked on the math skills that would help Jennifer manage her own small allowance with greater independence. "Katherine is the best teacher ever," Jennifer often told anyone who would listen, her face glowing with pride as she showed off the progress she was making in writing, cooking, and other skills that increased her confidence and sense of accomplishment. Katherine had also introduced Jennifer to some of her colleagues at school, expanding Jennifer's social circle and helping her develop friendships with other adults who appreciated her sweet nature and infectious enthusiasm for life. The planning for Jennifer's long-awaited Disney World trip had become a family project that brought them all together in excitement and anticipation. Jennifer had a countdown calendar on her bedroom wall and spent hours studying Disney guidebooks with Katherine, planning which rides they would go on first and which characters she most wanted to meet. "I can't believe it's really going to happen," Jennifer said almost daily, her eyes sparkling with joy as she talked about seeing Cinderella's castle in person and meeting Mickey Mouse. Michael had initially worried about the cost of taking the whole family on such an elaborate vacation, but Katherine had insisted that this trip was an investment in Jennifer's happiness and their family's shared memories. "Some dreams are worth any sacrifice," Katherine had told him as they booked their hotel reservations, and seeing Jennifer's face when she walks into that park is going to be worth every penny we spend. As Katherine reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point, she was amazed by how much her understanding of love, family, and sacrifice had evolved over the past year. The woman who had once felt betrayed by her husband's secrecy had been transformed into someone who understood that the deepest forms of love often require the greatest personal growth and the willingness to expand one's definition of family beyond traditional boundaries. "Michael, do you remember how terrified you were that I would leave when I found out about Jennifer and your father?" Katherine asked one evening as they sat together looking through photo albums filled with pictures of their new family traditions and shared experiences. "I can barely remember that person I used to be, the one who thought love was supposed to be simple and uncomplicated. Learning to love your family has taught me that real love is supposed to challenge us to become better people, more generous with our hearts, and more willing to see beauty in unexpected places." Michael pulled Katherine closer as they sat together on their couch, surrounded by the evidence of the beautiful life they had built together, photos of family dinners, Jennifer's artwork displayed proudly on their walls, and David's reading glasses left on the coffee table from his last visit. "Katherine, what started as my greatest secret became our greatest blessing," Michael said softly, his voice filled with wonder at how dramatically their lives had changed for the better. "I spent so many years thinking that loving Jennifer and caring for my father made me a burden that no one would want to share, but you show me that love doesn't divide, it multiplies. Our family isn't perfect, and it's certainly not conventional, but it's ours, and it's built on the kind of love that can weather any storm." As they held each other in the soft evening light, both Katherine and Michael knew that their story had become something beautiful, a testament to the power of unconditional love, the importance of family in all its forms, and the incredible strength that comes from facing life's challenges together rather than apart. Katherine's voice was filled with the wisdom that comes from experiencing profound personal growth through difficult circumstances as she reflected on everything their family had overcome and achieved together. "What I've learned through this whole experience is that love isn't supposed to be comfortable or easy all the time," Katherine said thoughtfully, her hand intertwined with Michael's as they sat surrounded by the warmth of their home and family. "Real love requires us to grow, to stretch beyond our comfort zones, and to embrace people and situations that challenge us to become better versions of ourselves." She looked at the photos of Jennifer and David that now filled their home, each one capturing moments of joy, growth, and shared experiences that had enriched all their lives immeasurably. Michael's so-called secret wasn't a betrayal of our marriage. It was an invitation to experience the kind of love that truly transforms people. The love that doesn't just accept what's easy, but embraces what's complicated and makes it beautiful. As Katherine and Michael sat together in their comfortable living room, surrounded by the photos and mementos of their beautiful blended family, Katherine turned to address viewers with the warmth and wisdom of someone who had learned valuable lessons about love, forgiveness, and the true meaning of family. Sometimes the most difficult challenges in our lives turn out to be the greatest blessings in disguise, Katherine said with a gentle smile that reflected the deep contentment and joy she had found in her expanded understanding of love and family. If you're watching this story from anywhere in the world, I hope it reminds you that love has the power to transform even the most complicated situations into something beautiful. Please share in the comments where you're watching from and what this story meant to you. Don't forget to like this video if it touched your heart, and subscribe for more incredible true stories about the power of love, family, and second chances. Thank you for sharing this journey with us. And remember that every family, no matter how it's formed, has the potential to create its own unique kind of magic when built on a foundation of unconditional love and acceptance.